and I've been really wrestling with it because of Bema.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
a lot. That like Peterson and Bema were like the big things that like got me thinking about a lot of this.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to talk about today for our main topic is the importance of integrating and understanding Eastern thought in the Christian life.
Oh, yes.
So I guess it's best to just start with a brief overview of the differences between Western and Eastern thought, and then how those kind of intertwine, and then what we see in the scriptures and Jesus, and how do we go about this wisely.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just start with some of those contrasts. So do you want to open up that discussion?
Sure. I mean, I can also just briefly outline my sort of experience with Eastern thought. Like I said earlier, I've been reading the story of philosophy for an absurd amount of time. Those philosophers are primarily like Western thinkers, but in my spare time, I've also taken the time to like observe different Eastern philosophies. My favorite Eastern philosopher has been Alan Watts. Like, think of that of what you will, but I love what he has to say or had to say on a lot of things that concern our lives, even though like it seems so prophetic because that was like 30, 40 years ago when he was talking about these things. But Eastern thinkers or people from, Eastern cultures are concerned with different parts of life and different problems than a lot of Westerners are concerned with. Westerners are often concerned with, like life after death, and how, we should be prepared for that. On more of a broad scope, Westerners are very interested in the facts, like in empirical measurements, in those, parts of science. Easterners are very oriented towards truths and what truths different stories have to tell us and like how that operates. So a lot of you'll find a lot more parables from Eastern philosophers than you will from Western philosophers. And those, if you even just take the time to like research different quotes from different philosophers like in the West and in the East, philosophers in the West will be concerned with like rhetoric and how, your argument is structured. Easterners will convey different truths about life and how to treat other people. So all of that stuff is well and good. Westerners like numbers. Easterners like, maybe poetry more is a good way of putting it.
And pictures.
Pictures, like mental images. I'm starting to run out of synopsis.
I think that's a good summary right there. Again, like my experience a lot has culminated in like Bema and like Marty. So for reference, if any of this makes you curious about Eastern Western thought, how it works in our faith, I'd highly encourage listening to the Bema podcast, especially episode 0, because this is when Marty outlines a lot of these differences.
Mm-hmm. And I do like the mental image that he paints. Consider looking at a room with windows and you're like standing outside this building. Westerners look through one window and we can see, the computer sitting on the desk, maybe a plant in the corner, but we're missing the other side of the room that we can't see from our perspective. And so Easterners look at things through a different window and can see different things in the room from different points of view. And so those looking through those windows changes our perception of how things in that room or that office interact with one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on the like numbers versus like pictures or stories, he gave a good example of like if we see 5 apples on a table in a bowl, we would think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Mm-hmm. We'd count them. Mm-hmm. Whereas a Hebrew might see that and think, well, that's Torah. That's like the first 5. Mm-hmm. That's the books of, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy.
And even another weird thing is that Easterners like odd numbers. because there's a middle
symmetry.
a middle
Yeah.
unit, a symmetry that you can
Which then
draw
goes
right
into
down
the
the middle.
thoughts of chiasms
Yes,
and all that.
yes.
So again, it's much more concerned with story and truth and picture than it is concerned with, observable fact or rhetoric or argumentation in the sense of how we would think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the question is why is it important to know this as Christians, as people who are wrestling with the scriptures, with the Bible, with just different viewpoints of things? Why is it important to understand Eastern thought?
Like observing Eastern thought is a beautiful place to go if you're currently, deconstructing, reconstructing some things in your Christian, in the Christian circle of your life, your beliefs and opinions and the way you think about things. The Bible is like written from an Eastern perspective, like a great majority of it. Now we can see like breadcrumbs of Western thought in the Synoptic Gospels, and even like in parts of John, there's Jesus structures a lot of the way Jesus's arguments in John, like when he's speaking with the Pharisees, are very like Western outlined. There's like a one, straight train of thought. Whereas
there's like a counter and then examples to that counter.
Right. There's counters, examples, point A, point B, and here's how point A, point B affect like situation C. Now in books of the Bible like Matthew, Mark, Luke, you'll find a lot of verses where Jesus is speaking. He's using parables. Mm-hmm. He's using situations to paint a picture, and he uses that as like a medium to convey truth. So I grew up as a Southern Baptist and moved to the Springfield area right before I started high school. I was 14. And so it wasn't until that I took, a class in high school about, approaching the Bible from a scholarly point of view, that a lot of things that I learned growing up, I didn't hold on to anymore, and decided not to hold on to those things. And even as I branched off reading different, philosophers and theologians and big thinkers on these topics, that I learned how important it is to understand these different points of thinking, because you find so much more in Scripture than you might just from one perspective, if you can see both sides of the room.